This episode of the Craftsman Online podcast is sponsored by Bricks Masons. From elegant Masonic rings that showcase your commitment to our craft to finely crafted regalia and apparel that honor your tradition, Bricks Masons delivers quality and craftsmanship that truly stands out. Shop now at bricksmasons.com and use promo code CRAFTSMAN, that's CRAFTSMEN, to receive free shipping with your first order.
The comments, opinions, and views shared during this program are of those individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of a Grand Lodge, Concordant Body, Appendant Body, Masonic Authority, or CraftsmanOnline.com. Welcome to the Craftsman Online podcast, the only 5-star rated Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York. And now your host, Worshipful Brother, Michael Arce.
Welcome back. You've joined us for an episode on the Master Craftsman, as I'm happy to bring in my guest this week. He's actually really a Master Craftsman. We'll find out what he prefers to be addressed as, but Masonically, we refer to him as Worshipful Brother Spencer Hamann. Welcome, Brother Hamann.
Welcome. Thank you, brother.
We just had a great conversation about last names and the fun ways to pronounce them. And, Arce is always fun for people to roll or have fun with. And I'm sure your whole life you've heard it as well. As far as your title, do you prefer to be called an artisan, a doer, a master, a craftsman, a skilled or talented person? What term do you like to use?
I don't really necessarily put a term on it, to be really honest. I don't necessarily think about myself in those terms. I just think of myself as a person trying to do good work, and that can take many different forms and many different styles, but not any particular title. I'm trying to think about it titularly.
You do have a fancy professional title, and I'm probably going to need your help on pronouncing this as well. Professionally, you are a luthier? Is that am I saying that right?
Luthier, absolutely. People will ask me, they'll see the title and they say, "Oh, what church do you go to?" Or they say, "Oh, Luciferians," or whatever, and it's like, well, nothing quite that nefarious. No, a luthier, yes.
Yeah, and it almost sounds like the answer to a question in Jeopardy.
I'm sure it's been there.
Because it really doesn't, to me, just looking at what the work is that you do with adjusting and repairing and restoring fine string instruments, you'd be like, how did they get that name? Do you know the history of that name, luthier?
Yeah, as I understand it, well, it's kind of French, so if you were to put the French on it, I think it would be luthier, which has to, that even demystifies it a little bit there if you think about the instrument, the lute. So a luthier, somebody that works with lutes, and then very broadly, somebody that repairs or works with string instruments in some capacity or another, whether building, restoring, and string instruments is also very broad as a category. So it's a word that can mean a lot of different things.
So he's a worshipful brother. He's also the craftsman and luthier behind the Uncommon Gavel, and we'll share the link to his website because Brother Spencer, he creates these beautiful works of art out of wood. And when we first launched the Craftsman Online project back in March of 2020, our idea was actually to produce a monthly digital publication and like a monthly newsletter or magazine. We would feature an operative Mason because we thought that would be really cool to showcase that to the Brothers of the Craft in New York State. And we had an artist, we had a tattoo artist, we had a beekeeper, we had a pipe maker, and then we kind of fell off with being able to find operative brothers. So when I stumbled across you in the craft, I was like, oh my gosh, I just have this awe and massive amount of respect for Masons who actually are good with their hands, because most of us in the craft hopefully aspire to be good with our minds. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So how did you get into this as a trade or a profession?
Sure. Well, it started with usually people that get into this work come at it from one of two different backgrounds, sometimes both, either from a musical background, they have some musical interest or some musical skill and they're interested in working with instruments, or they develop that interest, or they come at it with a woodworking background or some kind of mechanical background and think, think, oh, I'd like to apply this to something interesting, and they maybe become fascinated by music and pick it up that way. I started more of the first with a little bit of the second. I started taking viola lessons in my public school when I was in fourth grade, and I just really gravitated toward music and being able to perform. I mean, you can call it whatever you want, self-expression or an outlet or whatever, but it just really worked for me, and I really loved the instrument, and I loved being able to play, and it was something that, as a not particularly ball sport oriented kid, it really felt like something I could do and something that I could do well at, and it was a good feeling, so I really poured myself into it. Played all through the rest of elementary school, middle school, through high school. In high school, I was taking private lessons with a gentleman in my hometown. His name was Mark Cooley, a very talented man, and he was a luthier in Sheboygan. He did a lot of work on instruments there, and my father is a mechanical engineer, and so I grew up in a household that was very encouraged to make things with my hands, to use my hands. We had his workshop in the basement with all kinds of tools, and always very encouraged to tinker and those sort of things. And so as I thought about instruments and we were thinking about careers and things like that, it seemed kind of, well, the two things that I particularly like are music and doing things with my hands, or creating. So where's the overlap? And it got into creating instruments. I don't even remember exactly how the conversation started or how it began, but he asked me at one point, Mark Cooley, that is, my teacher, well, would you want to build an instrument sometime? And so I was a freshman in high school at that point, and said, well, yeah, having no idea how one would even get into doing something like that. So I would go over to his place on weekends and after school, and in a year or so, we built a viola together, which I played all through high school and through a bunch of college and everything like that too, and learned the craft from him, or at least began learning the craft from him, and went from there.
A couple things. First of all, Sheboygan, for our listeners that haven't left the friendly confines of New York State, I'm guessing that's Wisconsin or Illinois?
Yeah, Sheboygan, Wisconsin. So Sheboygan is about an hour north of Milwaukee, just as the next kind of big city in the area there. It's right on the lake.
What throws me off is that I don't hear the Wisconsin accent. You have a very neutral tone.
That could be for a couple of reasons. I've lived in Illinois now, in northern Illinois, friendly flatland, since I graduated college in 2011. So that could be where some of that's gone. I also did, growing up, especially in high school, I was very involved with theater and also forensics, so competitive speaking, things like that. And so not that they necessarily encouraged you've got to learn this neutral tone, but from doing a lot of theater and being involved in speaking and things like that, I think a lot of that you tend to pick up, so you don't, you can sound professional, I guess.
Yeah, you have a true American accent. I grew up in Arizona where we don't really have an accent as well, and worked in radio, and that was one of the benefits where they're like, oh, you could work in any market or do commercials or be professional voiceover actor because you don't have that regional dialect. And I was like, oh, well, I guess that's a good thing.
Yeah.
One of the things that we kind of have parallel, and this is so fascinating, is I also am a elementary school band player or member.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, in my elementary school, 5th grade is when we could take band, and everybody in, oh gosh, I'm probably going to be showing my age here, but everybody in the early 90s that I grew up with wanted to play the saxophone because that was the instrument that was in the NXS videos and the Aerosmith videos, and it was just so cool.
Yep.
And my elementary school would provide free school instruments to kids, which of course my parents' ears perked up over that, but they were not the saxophone. So I got stuck playing the trombone and pretty much played that all the way to my sophomore year in high school, and then got involved with ag classes. But when you were telling the story of, hey, I built my first instrument, I'm like, actually, I tried to break my first instrument because I wanted to play sports like, every other kid that I was going to school with. But my mom was like, no. The girls like the boys in the marching band. And she just wanted me to be there because she felt that it was safer. But I think that's so cool that you built the first instrument that you learned to play and then really, some would say mastered how to play that instrument, and you made it.
It was very interesting and a really cool connection to be able to. Um, I don't even know how to really describe it. Just this incredible feeling of full circle completionism that I was able to perform on and learn on something that I made with my own hands and knew in a way that I didn't know other instruments. And a lot of that was even the drive and my initial interest in that kind of craft was here was something that I spent hours a day and a week and whatever practicing and learning and doing all this stuff, but kind of realized at one point that like, geez, I don't know very much about this thing at all. This instrument, this viola, if something happens to it, I'm totally stuck. I have no idea what to do with it. If something breaks, if it needs adjustment, I don't know. And that kind of weird helplessness, we use a lot of car analogies in the business because everybody drives cars and has some connection with that. But just like, it's like having a car and not knowing how to put gas in it, and at a certain point, it's just like, that's kind of unacceptable. And then you start looking into it and you start going further and further. And it really just took hold of me.
What makes a viola different than a violin?
The short answer, well, there's many things. The short answer is the instrument itself is a little bit bigger. If we're talking about full-size adult instruments, orchestral string instruments, which are my specialty, what's interesting about them compared to band instruments, you're talking about the trombone, band instruments kind of exist in single sizes. There's a flute, there's a trumpet, there's a clarinet, that is what it is. There's not like half-size clarinets or whatever. I mean, there's E-flat clarinets and B-flat clarinets and bass clarinets, whatever, saxophone family, but a B-flat clarinet is a B-flat clarinet. There's not like a truncated version of it or whatever. Orchestral string instruments are interesting because they exist in smaller sizes and fractional sizes. And so a kid who's in elementary school would get fitted for an instrument that would be the correct size for them proportionately based on a number of factors, their height, how long their arms are, how long their fingers are. And as you grow, if you continue playing that instrument, the idea is that you would go through different sizes until you eventually reach the full-size instrument, which is the adult size. And I give that context just for when we're talking about full-size instruments, adult-size instruments, the viola is usually bigger than the violin. Full-size violins top out at a body length of about 14 inches. Full-size violas are considered usually anywhere between 15 inches up to a really big one would be like 17 inches. So the instrument itself is a little bit bigger. They're still played on the shoulder the same general way. The other aspect is that the tuning of the instrument is different. Violas are tuned a fifth lower than violins are. Violins have a high E string, which is a fifth above the viola, the highest string on the viola, and violas have a low C string, which is a fifth below the lowest string, the G, on the violin. The other differences include how they are played, as far as how the parts that they wind up playing in music generally. Violins tend to play a lot of melody parts, whereas violas oftentimes have harmony and some kind of accompaniment for that. So that can also be a challenge for learning that instrument. Low strings especially don't always have the part of the song that you can hum or that the melody that and sometimes that can be difficult to communicate to kids and to students that, hey, the thing you're playing is maybe not the tune you're whistling, but it's very important and here's why, and philosophical differences there, I guess.
Right. Well, it's interesting we're throwing out hometowns. Sheboygan is where Brother Spencer's from. I grew up in a small town in Arizona, Yuma, Arizona. We did not have, at least when I was going to school, maybe things have changed, but we had concert band, which was all the woodwinds, the brass and drums. We had no string instruments in my high school. That wasn't offered. You most likely had an orchestra as part of your concert band with the full accompaniment. My question, though, is what I found now looking back at those days, I probably discovered more of an interest in the arts than my friends in school because of the fact that I was playing, like I remember Dances with Wolves was one of the movies that came out, and in high school we were playing the music from that, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so beautiful. And when I would watch the movies or I would go to the theater or even just start to listen to classical music on my own, I realized, especially at that time, that none of my friends were aware of any of this or doing any of these things. Did you find yourself at a young age having more of an appreciation for the arts because of the fact you were playing music?
Absolutely, absolutely. And at the time, I probably wouldn't have thought about it or quantified it so much in that way. Definitely an increased sensitivity to, to music, to beautiful visual art, all these kind of things that combine up, and even just kind of noticing details and things like that about, that's curious, something that might be totally mundane, a pattern of bricks on the side of a building, or some bird singing or whatever, things that are just totally commonplace would kind of catch me, and I'd think about it for a while, and definitely didn't put it all together. And it wouldn't be until, being an adult reflecting on those sort of things, that maybe that's where that came from. But yeah, I mean, that heightened awareness, I guess.
We don't have the budget for it, but I definitely will catch myself, and it's been one of the scores that I will hum to myself. But Jurassic Park,
Oh yeah.
beautiful. It's still one of my favorite movie soundtrack pieces, and I love John Williams. The Craftsman Online podcast is now sponsored by BricksMasons.com, our favorite destination for all of our Masonic shopping needs. Whether it's apparel for yourself or a cool gift idea for another brother, make BricksMasons.com your online marketplace where tradition meets innovation. Protect the most important book in your collection with a classic and durable leather-bound Masonic book cover. These are nice, full-grain leather, excellent quality, handcrafted by experienced and skilled craftsmen. You get the best finish and double stitching to ensure long-term durability. I love that these covers also come with a nice little pen or pencil holder. That makes taking a writing instrument everywhere pretty easy and handy. The leather-bound cover is available in large through pocket sizes, so you should be able to protect everything from your ritual book to your Masonic Bible with a leather Masonic book cover at BricksMasons.com. Visit BricksMasons.com and explore their extensive catalog. Elevate your Masonic experience with style and substance. Plus, Craftsman Online podcast listeners use promo code CRAFTSMAN, that's CRAFTSMEN, at checkout to enjoy free shipping with your first order. Brothers, do you remember how you felt when you were first called to Freemasonry? The excitement of each degree? If you can still feel that call of the East, you're encouraged to apply to join the Scottish Rite Northern Masonic jurisdiction. The Scottish Rite offers Master Masons like you an opportunity to continue your Masonic journey and delve deeper into our craft through their 29 degrees. And there's an easy way to join the Scottish Rite. It's called Join the Rite Night, a virtual initiation where you can witness the requisite 4th degree and officially become a Scottish Rite Mason. There's 7 opportunities to join online from February 1st to April 25th. Here's what you do. Visit the Scottish Rite online at srnmj.us and click on the Join button. You can also join in person at a Scottish Rite reunion near you. Your journey to the 32nd degree in Freemasonry awaits. Take the first step at srnmj.us and click on the Join button today. I just think it's so cool. We're Masons having this conversation, and brothers are probably sitting here going, wow, you can be from different places and think that you're completely different, but that's the beauty of the craft. So the next obvious question I have to ask is, you're going through, you're a musician in high school, you're learning how to build and repair and restore instruments. What led you to want to become a Freemason?
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. There wasn't necessarily a really strong nexus point or something. I've talked to a lot of amazing brothers, and I've heard really cool family stories about, granddad was a Mason, or I had this experience, or got the scholarship, or met these guys, or whatever, and I knew I was going to be a Mason kind of thing. It was more kind of a background hum for me. In college, my college degree was in musicology at good old UW Milwaukee. And I, through reading and in the music history research, would come across Freemasonry occasionally. There were a number of composers and musicians and people that were brothers. And you'd, read certain names. Certainly, one of the most famous ones, obviously Mozart, talking about the symbolism and the magic flute and all these things. And Masonry was just another whatever background organization, other thing kind of in the fabric of history. And I don't know exactly what the inciting incident was, but after college, I moved to Northern Illinois, where my fiance, now wife, was finishing up her studies, and I was kind of looking for some involvement in something. I didn't know a lot of people in the area, other than some coworkers and things, and was kind of looking to get involved with the group or find some people of substance that might be interesting. And while reflecting on this at one point, for whatever reason, again, I don't know exactly what set it off, but the Masons came across my radar again, and I thought, oh, what the heck? And so I did a quick Google search, and turned out there was a Masonic lodge in the town over, just about 10 minutes away. And so started making a few phone calls, and that was before they had too much of a functioning website. And I also didn't have any idea that a Masonic lodge wasn't necessarily like a stocked office or anything like that, where there were people around, or how that worked. And so I'd leave messages on the answering machine every couple days, thinking, oh, well, I don't know why they're not returning my calls, might not be whatever. And finally, one day, somebody happened to be there and pick up and said, yeah, why don't you come over for dinner? And, rest kind of went from there.
You telling that story reminds me early on when I was, like everybody who has an interest in Freemasonry that's looking to, join a lodge, and you're watching every video you can find on YouTube or reading every article. And I remember there was this one video on YouTube where they were exploring the outside of a Masonic temple, and they're like, oh my gosh, there's finally lights on in this building during, and we see somebody moving around. I'm like, yeah, it's probably the secretary who has to go in and pick up the mail and pay some bills.
Yep.
It's not stocked with like 300 Freemasons that are secretly ruling the world with a private UN meeting or something. So.
Nothing nearly that organized.
No, definitely not. So another obvious question that I have to ask, as someone who has that music background, and I think music in our Masonic degrees and ritual brings so much more to that experience for the candidates and for those of us on the sidelines that are there. Do you provide music at all for any of your lodges or the lodges in your area?
I have in the past. For 1 year, I served my mother lodge as their organist, and I'm not an organ player. So I opted to do everything by playing violin for some openings and for degrees at appropriate parts, which was a really cool experience to be able to do, and a lot to think about as far as choosing pieces and what to play when, to try and personalize things. And I wanted to be reverent and respectable, but not play the same few things over and over and over and over. You can hear Pleyel's hymn so many times before it's like, okay, and so just kind of that interesting exploration. I've worked with other gentlemen in our district, and we've talked about kind of putting together music. Essentially, we were working on a project at one point to kind of have some ready put together degree playlists, for lack of a better term, so that more or less your organist didn't necessarily have to be somebody sitting down at a musical instrument, but somebody who'd be able to run a computer with some playlists and be able to fade things in and out and kind of create the soundscape and take this through. One of my very good friends in our district, another brother, Adam Hassel, who is an audio engineer. He had worked at our lodge last year, providing some really cool music and putting things together through this kind of model about having some music on playlists to be able to run through a computer and provide some really awesome things behind our opening and other ceremony stuff that really made it pretty special.
One more music question. By the time this episode airs, we'll be well into the new year 2024. So when I say last year, I mean season 3, 2023. And we had on worshipful brother Nathan St. Pierre, who did an episode on Masonic songs, and he's also a music teacher. And he shared the fact that kids that usually do well playing musical instruments or understanding rhythm, they tend to perform better in math. And I challenged him on that one as a lifelong C in math student.
Oh man, I mean, I feel that there are aspects of math I do all right at. I feel pretty confident in geometry, but I I'll tell you very honestly, I dropped calculus to go back to choir because I just couldn't hack it in high school. And I guess for me, when math got really abstract, I had a hard time with it. When it was things that I could see, figures, numbers, measurements, those things really resonated, as they seemed like they were something physical and real and applicable, and that okay, I can understand what I'm manipulating, versus very nebulous ideas in these large equations, which I had a hard time with. So
if there has ever been a fundraising t-shirt for choir, from calculus to choir, I think we have a bestseller right there. I love that. So again, the website is the Uncommon Gavel. You'll find the link to it in the notes for this episode of the Craftsman Online podcast. And one of the lines from your website that really hit me was, quote, "A craftsman's tools are a reflection of the individual who wields them, and exceptional workmen deserve exceptional instruments." I love that line. Please tell me that you wrote that.
I did. If I stole it from somewhere, I apologize because I don't know where, but
I'm just curious, as a operative craftsman, when you come into speculative masonry, where basically our listeners are familiar with the concept that at some point in time, the operative craftsman faded out and the thinkers came in, and we kind of hijacked this body and induced a bunch of philosophy into it. When did you start to make that connection as someone who works in the craft with the actual ancient and gentle craft of Freemasonry?
I started making that connection day one while getting my first degree and going through these ceremonies. The presentation of the working tools and thinking of these aspects really hit me hard. And it wasn't probably until a good year later, when I was a master mason, that I started to appreciate and realize that these allegories, the ideas of these tools and what it means to have these tools, and even just simply how the tools function. What is a square? How do you use one? What does a level mean? All the what compasses, how the heck do you use this? It's not just drawing circles. There's so many more powerful things this tool can do. These are part of my daily work. I have all of these in my toolbox, and on a daily basis I'm employing most of them. And they're such a central part of the work that I do professionally and daily that their meaning and this power within that really resonated, really hit me. And I kind of took for granted that, okay, all other Masons who are already in this, whether or not they're using these tools professionally or in any kind of personal way, they must surely appreciate this and they must surely understand it. And was almost a little disappointed to find that a lot of guys didn't know what a plumb was. If you kind of, what do you use? Okay, it's teaching you to be upright. Well, do you know how you actually use that? Do you know what that tool looks like and how you would put it to practice? Using a compasses again, or a dividers. This aspect of the mundane, the physical work, also representing something on a much more higher spiritual level on a different plane, was really powerful to me. And that kind of meditative practice, every time you pick up an object like this physically and are using it, moving it here, as above, so below, really. And the magnitude of that just hits me every time. And especially if my mind is wandering a little bit in the shop, I just can't help but going right back to there, and it just makes everything even more special and personal.
Yeah, I would think that early in your Masonic career, it's kind of like the low-hanging fruit. Like back when I was in third grade and was taking piano lessons and was learning where middle C was on the piano, and Hot Cross Buns was the one song that I knew how to play from memory. For you to sit down as an operative mason and explain what we would refer to as the working tools in the speculative craft, that would have been a great presentation. But I know that you have taken your Masonic journey and your knowledge and your research, and you've gone way beyond that on the esoteric level. Do you still find joy coming back to those simple lessons of the working tools and taking your audience member or the brother in question like deeper into space with where these deeper meanings really are?
All the time, and whenever there's an opportunity. It's never gotten old for me, and I don't think it ever will get old. It's nice to have a glass of wine, but you still need water. And I feel a lot of this sort of these ideas and these tools and these concepts are so basic and so elementary that no matter where you are going, if you are truly building that foundation in your knowledge and on your Masonic edifice, you never really lose sight of this. You're never really beyond that, or you should never be so far beyond it that you forget it.
The website is the Uncommon Gavel. We're talking with Worshipful Brother Spencer, who displays all of these wonderful Masonic gavels. And as someone who is sitting in the East for the first time this year, the gavel really kind of defines the master. I mean, there's the hat, but then there's, the personalized gavel. And some of these on your website, I mean, you could tell they're all handmade. You're not going to find another one of these anywhere else. You put excellent descriptions of the work. It's kind of a jump. You went from musical instruments to Masonic gavels. How did you make that pivot, as they would say?
It began very honestly with considering a lot of I guess you would say, the scrap that's generated in my business and my work. making instruments or working on instruments like that, the wood that's selected for making fine violins is very particular wood. It's a certain species of maple that's oftentimes been aged or dried for decades. It's kind of one of the interesting philosophical aspects of doing this work is that if you are preparing a piece of wood that's going to be an instrument someday, just the amount of time and preparation and then the years for that it will take to dry and be prepared fully, it probably won't really be usable in your own lifetime. So you're kind of doing work for somebody else that somebody else will appreciate later. And that's being maybe a little bit too general about it, but there's a lot of very beautiful wood that we use, and we wind up with extras or pieces of it. There's kind of a joke that every luthier has a really phenomenal collection of charcuterie boards, because you wind up with all this great material that's you got to do something with. You can't just throw it out. And the first gavel I made was kind of just from looking at some of this stuff and thinking. I think it was actually shortly before a degree we were doing a first degree, and we were looking for the gavel in the lodge, and I was just thinking about, oh, I should just make one of these and I could donate it. That'd be easy. So I used some of the offcut figured European maple that we had, some ebony, and I had some teak laying around from something, and just made a simple gavel and kind of gave it to the lodge, put it in with a supply of stuff. And as we got working and as we got thinking about it, it was simply something that I kind of thought, well, I could make more of these. This would be, as you kind of mentioned, the gavel is the symbol of the master, and the master's authority is pretty universal and pretty ubiquitous. And kind of getting back to even that line that you said from my website before, a craftsman's tool is a reflection of the individual, rather than just the gavel being something that a lodge has on a cart or in a locker full of stuff that maybe nobody thinks twice about. Having an implement that reflects the craftsman and that a master can use, that he has either designed or had design input on, and is ultimately something he can be really excited to use, even if it's the only tool he picks up that day or that week or that month, depending upon what he does. He still gets to have some sort of connection to this, and in some way of not just a speculative interaction with a tool, but a true operative one.
I was looking at the gavels that you have listed there, and I'm imagining that a lot of the ones that are listed are no longer available, that someone is now taking those home and wielding them to power in their lodge. The one that caught my eye that was just amazing, because I'm a huge fan of the lesson of the rough and the perfect ashlar, is the garrison.
Yeah.
Do you have a gavel that you made it and you're like, oh, this makes it so hard for me to sell this, or oh, I want to keep this one for my own?
I have moments like that definitely with all of them. And most things that I make, there's usually some, brief honeymoon period where hopefully, I've got a little bit of time. I'll leave it on my bed stand next to my bed and look at it before I go to bed. And when I get up in the morning, or fumble around with it for a while while watching TV or whatever the case, and just kind of interact with it and be with it for a while, but ultimately let it go. As you mentioned, all of the instruments that are listed on the website, those are all spoken for. Most of the work that I do is commissioned specifically, and somebody will reach out and say, hey, I'm interested in a gavel, and we'll do a consultation. Everything from, is there a particular wood you have in mind? Are there colors you like? Are there symbols you like? Shapes, whatever the case. And sometimes guys have all kinds of ideas and are very, very specific, and I like this and I like that and I want this and that and whatever. And sometimes it's not too many ideas at all, or not too many details, and happy to run with it either way, but all with that idea of the hopefully making something that they're going to treasure, rather than just some other odd thing off the shelf or out of a catalog. So yeah, all of those are one of a kind. I don't typically repeat gavels that I've done before. I'll definitely riff on aspects and things like that again, but occasionally I've had some disappointed brothers saying, oh, can you make me a replica of, whatever, I want exactly that one, and say, well, I can't make you exactly that one, but, because that was made for brother so-and-so, but we'll get close. What did you like about it? And try and,
Well, I was just going to ask, like, in the last 10 years, how many requests have you had for Thor's hammer, Mjolnir?
Oh, man. Yeah, Mjolnir is, especially with the Marvel franchises and everything coming out, that has been a very popular one. The really, really cool version of it I got to do, which is one of the ones I was very proud of, was the Martinez gavel for Worshipful Brother Joe Martinez. He gave me a lot of leeway to run with. He had a lot of things that he wanted to incorporate, but as far as how to do that, a lot of leeway, a lot of freedom, and was really able to have a lot of fun with with that. In each of these instruments that I'm making, I'm constantly trying to learn new techniques and push the envelope of what I'm able to do, to expand my own knowledge, my own arsenal, but just also my own appreciation for these different kinds of craftsmanship. And so that gavel, for example, I taught myself and learned how to do silver wire inlay, to do all the shapes in that. That's all fine silver that's cut and inlaid into that gavel. I cut up abalone shells and did fretwork to make the tria prima on the other side of the instrument, the skull on the cap. All of that was done on silver wire inlay, and that was a really cool experience to get to learn that technique, and a really cool outlet to be able to apply it. So always trying to push a little farther and learn a little more.
Worshipful Brother Joe, good friend. So are the guys with the Masonic Roundtable, and I was fortunate enough to visit his lodge, Manassas Lodge, in Manassas, Virginia, when he was Worshipful Master in the previous year. And hoist, that thing has got some weight to it. It's got some heft. And when he drops it, you can hear it everywhere around in the room. And yeah, it was really cool. And I'm like, who's the guy that made this? And then that's kind of what led me to discover you. The other time I read and saw your name is in the connection to the Chicago Masonicon with Brother RJ from the Whence Came You podcast. And he's been a guest on ours. It's gracious to give his time. What was your, I didn't get a chance to see your presentation in 2023, but what was your takeaway from getting to be a part of something as big and all these Masons from around the country coming up for a Masonic Con?
Well, it's really wild. I mean, there's a lot of things that you can take away from a weekend like that. The fellowship, the different presentations, and the topics, the new sets of knowledge that come up with it. The big thing that still really strikes me about conventions like that, or I've been fortunate to go to the Midwest Conference on Masonic Education a few years as well. The thing that really hits me with that is just a feeling of Masonry is not so insular as we oftentimes wind up experiencing it as, where we have, certainly the couple of guys, brothers that we might be really, really good friends with and we talk to outside of lodge, and then our immediate home lodges and maybe some other lodges in our districts or areas or however things are brought up. But it can feel that even though all these things are happening Masonically all over the world, and you're not the only lodge, in the city or the state or the whatever, when you come to an event like that, you really experience that, and it's something that is much more powerful, of course, than just somebody telling you, you're not alone. But just getting to see and interact with all these brothers from different walks of life and different areas, you find some of the things that make us different, and how we do our work differently, and how we experience the craft differently. But more than that, you find the things that we have in common and that unite us and make us the same. And I just think that's really powerful, and that's something that's hit me with any of these big events that I've been privileged to go to. So one of the easiest ways to find me there is there on the website, uncommongavel.com or the uncommongavel.com. I think I have both of them. There is a form, or there is a line on the homepage which says inquire, and it will take you to a form that you can fill out to reach out to me directly. That's probably the easiest way to grab me there. Usually, as I kind of alluded to before, we'll do some kind of consultation, some sense of their likes and dislikes within the craft, things they want to have reflected in an instrument made for them. If they have a piece of material that is special to them, I can definitely work in wood or material or whatever. If somebody has something, a piece of a cherished piece of furniture or a tree or whatever, we can look at getting that put together if that's something that would be meaningful. I've worked in acacia wood before, all kinds of things like that, depending. But ultimately, we'll have some consultation back and forth about figuring out how involved or uninvolved they want to be in the process, and establish lead time and get to work.
It's just so neat that you made this time to connect with us so that you could share some of that special history, because that's what Freemasonry to me is really all about, is the legacy that we share for future generations.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate getting to meet you and our discussion that we're able to have. What you're doing is, I think, very special, and highlighting people and getting connections made in the broader craft and all these different facets of things that are above and beyond just any one person as individuals. I think that's really cool what you're doing, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here and our discussion, and it's been really cool.
Worshipful Brother Spencer Hamann. Hamann from the Uncommon Gavel. Thanks for coming on the Craftsman Online podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure you follow the Craftsman Online podcast on Spotify or subscribe on Apple Podcasts. We're available on all streaming platforms with new episodes every Monday morning. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.